Hi everyone, it's Drake again, and today is going to be a rambly video by request. So, of course, as always, I have a bunch of stuff I've been thinking about, and I'll see how much of it I cover in this video. I guess a good way to start would be, I went and saw Megalopolis twice in the last 2 weeks or so. I've discussed it with a couple of my friends, or a few of my friends, and yeah, I would say I haven't been looking at reviews, but just through talking to people, I've been hearing kind of an idea of what the reviews have been by the professional review class or the amateur review class, which of course I have no respect for really at all, especially for movies. But yeah, my main feeling about Megalopolis is that, like, my main I guess, sociological feeling is that I think it's really an embarrassment for our whole society that a movie like that is so misunderstood, because what that therefore means is that if you can't even understand that movie, you have absolutely no hope of understanding the situation we're in, especially related to ecology and the environment and so on. And so that kind of got me down, realizing just even the people who went to see, a Coppola movie that really hadn't been advertised very much, and maybe upon first learning about it and watching a trailer, it might alienate the average, doofus in the United States especially. So even the people who went to go see it most of them, it seems, were filtered, which is disappointing. But I think, being a teacher, it just emphasizes to me the lack of general education. And my main interest lately has been looking into the Middle Ages, basically filling in my own gap of education. And the overall, just the overwhelming feeling I get while I'm reading about these scholars in the Middle Ages who some of them spend their entire life roaming around, going from library to library to library, walking on foot around the entirety of Europe. And with such little and limited resources they had, they are smarter than 99.99% of people today, even in the so-called developed world, you could say. And it really clarified some things for me. I guess connecting it back to Megalopolis, Coppola draws, in the end, I think, kind of a heavy-handed comparison between Rome and the United States. But what he does well is that he doesn't just try to follow what really happened in Rome, and in the end, he calls it a fable. And the way I kind of conceptualize that is that the movie doesn't really need a plot, because real life is the plot. And then the movie is a fable, an allegorical reading of reality, basically. And in that same way, the movie is basically asking, are we any different? We being the modern world, or the United States, or this current American empire. And what I've really been thinking about the Middle Ages lately is, are we even out of the Middle Ages? And then the funny answer is, most people aren't. But even at a large scale, or even when you take the most intelligent people or most aware people of today, truly, are we out of the Middle Ages? Because really, how we view nature is even worse than the way nature was treated in the Middle Ages. Like, nature had more respect in the Middle Ages than it does today. So it's obvious that in some ways our culture being the dominant global, like industrial Western culture that is kind of subsuming everything, capturing everything, is in notable ways, you know, a regression from the Middle Ages. Now, of course, that's not to say that, you know, everything is, but it did make me think the question, you know, are we actually out of the Middle Ages? Like, what is the Renaissance? Was the Renaissance actually a Renaissance of any kind? Because what you find if you do actually any reading in the Middle Ages is that really nothing was lost. Like, deep down, nothing was lost. If you consider the Middle Ages more than, you know, a century before Charlemagne or something like that, yeah, there was some stuff lost there. But when you get to the 1100s and Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd are being translated from the Arabic or even being read in the Arabic in Europe, nothing is lost. They have Aristotle, they know of Plato, they know of Homer, Virgil, everything. Cicero, obviously, Augustine was totally unbroken from his time, Boethius, and so on and so on. And, you know, with Megalopolis, I think the main issue with that movie is that most people are totally uneducated. Even seemingly educated people who have been to college and whatever have been, like, forced to try to educate themselves. They still manage not to. They still manage to stay uneducated against all odds, basically, because it has truly never been easier to be educated. And it's almost like you have to drag people kicking and screaming to educate themselves, and they still won't, you know, even if you drag them. And I think that's really the troubling thing, because one of the key aspects of the movie, I think truly the two key values in the movie is education and love. Like, those are the two things that Coppola thinks, those are the only two things that he thinks has a chance will save us. And he's almost certainly right. I mean, you know, those are the only two things that'll ever save us. But when you look around, it's hard to imagine that it'll work. There's no reason not to try. Like, I recently taught I Have a Dream to my senior English class because I want them to understand political rhetoric and rhetorical analysis of ads and speeches and so on. So the way I tell them is so they know how they're being manipulated and how not to be manipulated, this kind of thing. But I wanted to show them an exemplary speech. And one of the key fundamental aspects of I Have a Dream is, a separate striking quote is, unearned suffering is redemptive. That one really struck me after, I don't know how many times I listened to that speech. But his fundamental goal with that speech, Martin Luther King Jr.'s fundamental goal, was to make sure people didn't give up. Beyond all the surface level stuff of equality and whatever, you know, civil rights and so on. He wanted to make sure people didn't give up. And I think Megalopolis, you know, by the very end of the movie, you have that freeze scene where it's only the baby that's moving, where the clock is ticking, you know, it's 10 seconds to midnight or whatever. And then, yeah, they freeze time for the baby so that the baby has some kind of shelter and peace to grow up in, which is not the case for babies today. And yeah, I think fundamentally it's inspiring. Being a fairly young person, I'm not yet 30, and knowing that there's an 85-year-old, basically he was very wealthy through his movie career, and he dumps his entire net worth basically into this movie. But then the mirror reality of that is that so many people are so ignorant and uneducated that they somehow manage to just bounce off of the movie. You know, they have such diminished intellect, and it's just so frustrating. I mean, it was not a perfect movie by any means. You know, when I think, well, perfect movie, you know, I think of something like Stalker by Tarkovsky, or Koyaanisqatsi, or maybe like a Doctor Strangelove or Network as kind of like classic perfect movies. And, you know, Megalopolis is not perfect, but how many of the greatest works ever written are unfinished? So if they're unfinished, can they be perfect? And, you know, clearly Coppola was in a rush against time. His wife passed away before the movie was premiered, Eleanor. He dedicates it to his beloved Eleanor at the end. And of course, he's a very old man. He's been thinking about this movie for 40 years. And in the end, I think, you know, the only movie I've seen of his all the way through is Apocalypse Now, and I wasn't like extremely impressed with it. You know, it's an interesting movie, and I'm glad I watched it to help understand what it felt like to live through Vietnam as like an intelligent person, which is really the value I got out of it. But I kept comparing it to Blood Meridian, and it doesn't compare favorably to Blood Meridian. I mean, that's not saying much. But yeah, so I think that kind of diminished it in my mind. But then Megalopolis, one of the key quotes of the movie, I think, and this kind of gets into my recent interest to the Middle Ages, is that misquote of Petrarch that happens towards the end. Man's greatest enemy is civilization. And then they say, oh, that's a misquote, because the real quote supposedly is man is his own greatest enemy. And then the quote continues something like, because the exact things we wish not to have done, we do, and then the things that we wish we had done in life, we never end up doing. And if you think about that quote, the so-called misquote, but you broaden it out to civilization, you know, with this dead-end branch of civilization, or at least the current civilization as it manifests in our day, you know, what has civilization done? You know, what were the goals of civilization if you take like the highest of medieval ethics, or the true ideals of the Enlightenment, or whatever, you know, like the wisdom traditions of the world? What should have civilization done? It should have created equality, which it clearly failed at. It should have remove the need for warfare, which it obviously failed at. What else should it have done? It should have educated the earth, which it clearly failed at. It should have, on the other hand, not poisoned everything, which it failed at. It should have improved the life-sustaining capabilities of the earth, which it failed at. It did the opposite, you know, it being global civilization. What other things should it have done? It should have connected the wisdom traditions of the world, thinking of the small scale of the human level. It should have saved the best of itself for the future, which it seems to be failing at. And you know, I've been thinking, you know, because I've been reading a lot of medieval authors, who, many of whom lived 1,000 years ago. I think it's pretty clear what people in 1,000 years are going to think of our time. They're going to think of it as a huge embarrassment for what it could have been. And I don't think you can say the same for 1,000 years ago. You know, if you look back 1,000 years and you think what people did with what they had, really, it was pretty impressive. It was pretty impressive once you look at it clearly. But then when you look at what we have, you know, we have a one-time maximum energy surplus, exosomatic energy through fossil fuels and all related technologies and chemical processes and so on. And what are we doing with it? We are removing our own chance of sustaining on Earth. And, you know, a couple striking statistics in that direction. I just recently watched the roundtable on the Great Simplification with Tom Murphy and DJ White with Nate Higgins. And these statistics that they bring up that are just so striking, like when you look at mammalian biomass on Earth, currently today, humans and our domesticated animals are 96% of all mammalian biomass on Earth, including whales, including deer, including bears, including, you know, all mammals. And, you know, you only have to fast forward a little bit to see where that ends, you know. Tell me how it ends. You know, it's obvious how it ends. And then when you look at, you know, the increase in severe birth defects, it is doubling. And then modern medicine, which in the United States no one can afford, is trying to cover up the tracks, but it's not stopping the increase. It is just, you know, keeping people alive to, you know, to live through the defect. You know, being a teacher again, I remember the statistic. 1 in 9 children is diagnosed with ADHD. I mean, clearly that's fake. Clearly not 1 in 9 people are just born with attention problems. It's our society that's broken. You know, at what percentage do you need of children suffering do you need to then say that society is the disease? Society is diseased and we need to fix it so that we quit fixing children on the other end. And I think fundamentally Megalopolis is about all of this, but it is kind of, you know, the movie itself is exasperated based on the lack of awareness and change. You know, the movie was started really being planned in the 80s, and things have only gotten worse from the 80s. Half of all fossil fuels have been burned in the last 30 years in all of human civilization. Like over the last 10,000 years, half of all fossil fuels have been burned in the last 30. You know, basically my lifetime. Half. How many people know that? So clearly we've had a breakdown of education. Clearly global society is regressing. And I think the movie asks the viewer, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And I think that's why it breaks the fourth wall 3/4 through the movie. And there's this kind of fumbling discussion on time, you know, and of course all the allusions to Hamlet, direct references to Hamlet, even the outfit that, you know, Caesar, Adam Driver's character, wears throughout is just like classic Hamlet looking outfit. And this fumbling discussion of time, but then what is the real discussion about? It's about love. Love is the only thing that breaks down past, present, future, the only thing that breaks down space limitations. And yeah, I just think, why doesn't our society plan for the future people who are going to have to suffer through our current missteps, you know, our misapprehensions and lack of understanding and small-minded behavior and just base-level stupidities. Why don't we care about our own children is fundamentally the question, I think. And children's children and so on and so on. It really is depressing. But with that being said, you know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt on his second acceptance speech for the presidency in 1936, you know, he says, to some generations much is given, and to other generations much is required. This generation has a rendezvous with destiny, and I think, you know, truer words couldn't have been spoken for the generation that I was born into. And with that being said, I'm going to transition to my other interests. I've been looking into the Middle Ages and this kind of idea of, saving the past, protecting the past for the future. And kind of the idea I had, maybe the title for this video is My Own Montecassino. And you almost imagine that being like a, Frank Sinatra song from the 50s or something. My Own Montecassino. And Montecassino, if you're not familiar, was the basically the origin point of the rule of Saint Benedict, the monastic ethic originated there back in the 500s. But then Montecassino was really the most famous place in the Middle Ages for its scriptorium, where monks and scholars would make copies of works from the past that they wanted to save for the future. And a famous figure is Desiderius, or slipping my mind on which pope he was, from the 11th century. But he was a major figure, and that was kind of the golden age of Montecassino, this place that, who knows if they didn't copy those things, what we would have lost, Presumably we would have lost some, because even the downstream influence of Montecassino, that other scriptoria operated like they did, this rule of Saint Benedict. It's just fascinating. And I've been thinking, just to a kind of a fantastical degree, yeah, I am basically creating my own Montecassino. Personally, my own personal library, and then trying to save some of these books for the future, in the sense of understanding them, learning them, so that I can pass the understanding along to the next generation. And yeah, I'll just talk about some books I've been reading recently. Some of them I've gotten recently, some of them I've just picked back up from the past. But yeah, let's see, what am I going to get into first? I guess as the segue from man's greatest enemy is civilization, at least as it's currently practiced, I think I would add that as an addendum to that quote. Because I'm not one of those people that believes civilization as an entirety is a failure, because I just can't even imagine what that would look like. And I think I have a fairly active imagination, so it's hard to believe that other people have an idea of what that would look like, being born into our current time. But I do strongly believe that civilization could look vastly different as it has in the past. So with that being said, who's one of the most interesting people of civilization? Petrarch. And as it says on this top, so this is Ernest Hatch Wilkins. This is published by University of Chicago. Petrarch was the most remarkable man of his time. He is one of the most remarkable men of all time, remarkable for his awareness of the entire continent on which the drama of European life was being enacted. And then also I have this book, both of which I got at Kaboom Books in Houston, Petrarch, A Critical Guide to the Complete Works. And this book is just awesome because it's basically a really descriptive bibliography of everything he wrote, with intermixed, like almost a critical biography, but it's really focused on the works as the biography. It's really, really amazing. So I just got both of those yesterday. And yeah, Petrarch is just a fascinating figure, because I think when you're looking back at these figures from the Middle Ages, when you look at really the smartest people, the people who are most well-read, they feel like they're alive today. There's no difference between them and us. And then that makes you really question, is there fundamentally any difference at all, truly at all, between figures in the Middle Ages and us today? Which would imply the question, are we even out of the Middle Ages? Or does the Middle Ages even exist? Is kind of a corollary question. And when you look at a figure like Petrarch, I think you have to say no. Like, what are the Middle Ages? And I feel the same frustration with calling the time before 1492 pre-Columbian, or like North America, because it's assuming such a narrow-minded view of history to call the tens of thousands of years before our last 500 pre-Columbian. You know, it should be like our current period of 500 years should be post something else, if anything, post sustainable, or post life or something like that. Yeah, when you look at the Middle Ages, like, what is it the middle of? Nothing. You know, Dante's father was friends, or I mean, Petrarch's father was friends with Dante. Petrarch met Dante. So, like, Petrarch is considered both medieval and start of the Renaissance. But then what is Dante? You know, what is Dante? It's just, yeah, you could say, oh, these are fuzzy lines, but then what's the point? What's the point of having the Middle Ages? So anyway, that's been one of my frustrations, because when you read Petrarch, I mean, he's more intelligent than basically anyone you'll ever run into on a daily basis in the year 2024. So either most people are still in the Middle Ages and Petrarch wasn't, or it's just like an unbelievable oversimplification, which I, you know, really pick one, whatever, or pick both. But yeah, Petrarch has just been truly, truly fascinating, and I've been reading his Remedies of Fortune, Fair and Foul, and yeah, it's just wonderful. I want to get into Erasmus next, like really do a deep dive on Erasmus. I think he's another one of these kind of interesting figures. All right, what next? All right, I guess let's walk backwards then. We have Dumbarton Oaks Medieval Library, published by Harvard University Press, and this is the literary works of Alan of Lille, which I got interested in because of Ernst Robert Curtius, his medieval literature in the Latin Middle Ages. And Alan of Lille is most famous for his Anti-Claudianus, which was very well known in its own time. And as the little blurb says here, it is at once a summa of the scholastic achievement of the 12th century and an allegory of spiritual pilgrimage that anticipates the Divine Comedy. And yeah, it's just really been fascinating. And what I love about these editions is that they are bilingual. So you can read the Latin of the 12th century along with basically a literal translation. And the one thing I've really been kind of excavating is how reason was viewed in the Middle Ages, because I feel like the like totally uneducated take of the Middle Ages is that, oh, reason was ignored, like reason was just thrown to the side. Did they ever even talk about reason? Wasn't it all faith, this kind of idea? But then when you get to people like John Scotus Eriugena, for example, the Paraphysion, with his kind of Neoplatonic philosophy and this really intricate work of philosophy where he really carefully goes through the divisions of nature and thinking about it in, somewhat of an Aristotelian way. And no one knows how he even learned Greek, being in the 800s AD, coming out of Ireland, and then he became a huge scholar in the court of in the Carolingian courts after Charlemagne's time. It's just amazing to think what he must have gone through to become as educated as he was, and then to write a book like the Paraphysion. It's just awesome, just awesome. And then Next, let's go to Abelard and Eloise, the letters and other writings, notably including Abelard's history, History of My Calamities. The Calamities of Peter Abelard is basically an autobiography, one of the, maybe the most famous autobiography of the Middle Ages. And this is a really nice edition published by Hackett. It's, I think, the most comprehensive edition as far as it has all the letters, but then it has some of his songs and poems, letters of Eloise to Peter the Venerable, and then some appendices, but yeah, really cool. And then one of my really impressive finds, I guess you could say, lately is Abelard's Sic et Non, major work of medieval scholastic thought. And this is a critical edition published in the 70s by Blanche Boyer and Richard McKeown. And Richard McKeown was actually involved with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And he also edits the basic writings of Aristotle. He also co-translated a work of the sayings of Ashoka. And then over a long period of time, he worked on this Sic et Non, this critical edition. And when I ordered it, it was a Labor Day sale, so I got it 20% off what it was. And when I ordered it, it was like minorly an impulse purchase, I guess you could say, because I saw that it was English and Latin. And I took that to mean, because it was such a big book, I was like, oh, it must be bilingual. Oh, it must be bilingual, throughout. But it turns out that only the 100-page introduction, which is mainly a description of manuscripts, is in English. And then the actual entire text of Sic et Non is in Latin. So all that means is that I have even more of an incentive to learn medieval Latin. But yeah, what Sic et Non is Abelard came up with these very important, I guess you could say theological questions is how we would think of it today, but philosophical questions fundamentally. And the title Yes and No is his collection of major church fathers, major theologians, and their answers yes to these questions, or in the positive, and then answers no. And what he does is he just presents these yes and no to the reader, and then it's up to the reader to come to their conclusion on, how to figure out exactly, basically what they think about the disputations. And I just love that as an idea. I mean, what a nice way of going about philosophy, doing this really, really deep reading of libraries and other works, collecting it all and just saying for the reader, all right, here it is. Think for yourself, basically, which is the position we're always in at all times. So Peter Abelard has been just wonderful. And a really cool thing about that book is that it was owned by a man named John Jacobs. And in the meantime, I've also happened across another few books that were owned by John Jacobs. So I've been ordering these online, but it was from a particular bookseller. And one of the other books I ordered, in kind of a convoluted way, is A History of Christian Latin Poetry by Raby. And as it says on the front, from the beginnings to the close of the Middle Ages. And this, as I said, was also owned by John Jacobs. And then, in addition to this, I also got the 2-volume set by Raby of A History of Secular Latin Poetry, published by Oxford as well. Both owned by John Jacobs. And I reached out to the bookseller asking, hey, it seems like I'm just collecting books formerly owned by John Jacobs. Do you have a list of other books that he owned, or so on and so on? And he just told me that, this bookseller had the fortune of purchasing the collection of John Jacobs, who got a PhD in medieval and Renaissance studies at the University of Chicago back in the 70s, and presumably, passed away recently. And, it's just such an interesting feeling to go down the same path that someone else already had. And I'm genuinely curious if anyone who is still listening to this has had the same experience, where you're kind of pulling this thread of another person's library as you build it up, or if you've ever gone into a bookstore and just ransack books that have obviously been owned by the same person, or maybe an estate sale. I can imagine this happening. But I just think it's pretty fascinating where you find out that you're on the same track as someone, and you can preserve their interests for another generation at least. So anyway, if you're interested in medieval poetry, this is it. This is it. All right, what else? What else? Well, let's look at this big boy here. Another 2-volume work, about double the page count, and that is Albertus Magnus on Animals, a 2-volume paperback published by Ohio State University Press. And this is a reprint from a Johns Hopkins hardcover. And this is Albert the Great, Albertus Magnus, the teacher of Thomas Aquinas. And this is maybe his masterpiece, at least one of his masterpieces. This is the volume 1, which is right here, is a translation of Aristotle's work on animals with basically seamless interpolations from the Arabic commentators on Aristotle. And then volume 2, substantially, is just additions by Albertus Magnus to Aristotle's work on animals, volumes 11 through 26. And it's a medieval encyclopedia of animals, plants, medical remedies for things, what we would term today some mythological creatures, kind of spiritual creatures. And the main reason for getting it for me is really the fundamental reason why I read is to understand the way of thinking of the author, for whatever that means. And in this case, I just truly want to understand, what would it have felt like to be one of the most knowledgeable and intelligent people in the entire Middle Age Europe, sphere of Middle Age Europe? What would it have felt like? And I think you get a pretty good idea from reading people like Abelard or Albertus Magnus, or as I mentioned, his student, Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas, he knows I'm coming for him. I don't have a copy of the Summa Theologia yet. I do have a couple volumes of the Summa Contra Gentiles. But his Summa Theologia is in my sights. But I think it's kind of nice. I like putting books near each other of people who are friends in real life. So here you have Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas. In addition to that, we also have another work by one of definitely the most intelligent people in the Middle Ages, the Opus Maius by Roger Bacon. And this is 2 volumes in 1, published by University of Pennsylvania Press. And this book is fascinating because, again, it feels very modern. So then it makes you wonder, what does the word modern even mean? But what he starts out with, and it reminds me a lot of a figure like Thomas Browne, Part one is kind of a 30-page introduction, I would say, or almost not a preface, yeah, really an introduction on the causes of error. The causes of error, the four chief obstacles in grasping truth, which are submission to faulty and unworthy authority, the influence of custom, popular prejudice, and concealment of our own ignorance. And he talks about those each at length. And it's just amazing to think about, you know, from an uneducated perspective, that a figure in the Middle Ages, you know, in the, 1267 is when he finished this and sent it off to the Pope. 1267 was really, I think, indistinguishable from the kind of thing that we would ascribe to the scientific revolution, you know, or the Enlightenment period. So was Roger Bacon part of the Enlightenment? You know, he clearly talks about faulty thinking and illogical ways of thinking, and he highly, highly values reason as a pursuit to knowledge. And I think the average, you know, the average person who doesn't know anything about the Middle Ages would be shocked by this, I think. But yeah, the Opus Maius of Roger Bacon, who was famous for his brazen head, which supposedly would give you answers to any question you asked of it, but the answers might only be yes or no. And I just think it's so fascinating that these figures in the Middle Ages, you know, who themselves maybe weren't actually chasing, you know, kind of a mechanical wisdom, but they were ascribed that. And then now we find ourselves creating really kind of fundamentally worthless stuff like ChatGPT, and then NVIDIA now gets a huge evaluation, which is just throwaway garbage. And then you also have people, of course, chasing life everlasting, of the Holy Grail, of the Arthurian myths and the Middle Ages too. And so again, I think, you know, what's the meaning that we're like not in the Middle Ages anymore if we're still kind of chasing the same stuff? Or like, you know, Roger Bacon had arguments with natural philosophers of, should you trust experiment or theory? You know, what is the fundamental basis? Should you go with what math tells you and logic tells you, or should you go with what, you know, rational experience tells you? And that's, you know, that's still the discussion in modern physics. Modern being, you know, last 20 years. String theory and so on, which is mentioned in Megalopolis. But yeah, and then I guess finish off with a couple other books here. Romance of the Rose, complete translation of Romance of the Rose, one of the most important long poems of the Middle Ages, precedes Dante by a generation. And then this cover is how I feel whenever I think about the Pledge of Allegiance at the end of Megalopolis, as opposed to our own in the United States. And the Pledge of Allegiance at the end of Megalopolis is something like, you know, I pledge allegiance to our human family, the earth, indivisible, and long life, education, and justice are the values. And I plan on asking my students which one they think is better. We'll see what they say. And then last but not least, if you made it this far, you're probably most likely to be interested in what I'm about to show you. So after much difficulty and years and years and years of waiting and saving up money, I finally got my hands on the complete works of Du Fu himself in a bilingual edition, translated and edited by Stephen Owen, scholar of classical Chinese who was a long time at Harvard University. These books are really nice, printed and bound in Germany, and as I mentioned, bilingual with the classical literary Chinese on one side, and then a mostly literal translation on the other side. And again, I'll plug the good folks at Alienated Majesty, specifically Stephen. He was kind enough to help me get a hold of this copy because I ordered the copy from the distributor that the publisher recommends, and after paying full price, they sent me a single volume out of 6, which is just unforgivable to me. I'll never order from that company again. But then, yeah, Stephen from Alienated Majesty came through, and I was able to pick this up on their year anniversary. So if you haven't stopped by yet, Alienated Majesty, probably the best new bookstore in Texas, having been to almost all of them. All right, well, yeah. Death is Gang Boss.